We're on our last module on IT, and we would be amiss if we were to talk about IT and not talk about security. There's so many different examples that you can come up with about improper access or hacking into systems that have happened today. And we have it happening from outside the country. We have it also happening, though it's not often discussed, between competitors trying to get information, proprietary information from each other, companies that are developing patents, and they've put a lot of investment into R&D, and their competitors are trying to determine what's going on. So this IT security is very important, not just for financial reasons and stealing of personal data about our clients or our employees. There's just a lot to be gained by accessing data. And because of it, then we have to think about the risks that are involved here when we have IT and we have a big amount of data that is consolidated. In particular, you're thinking about consolidating into a database and you want to protect it. But there's other risks, so we'll start talking about the risks that are associated with business information systems. If you don't have your system available and someone comes online and wants to buy something, well, you could have a problem because then you don't make the sale. If you have transactions, and we were talking about end users and how everyone developing their own particular application wouldn't be good because there'd be a lack of audit trails. You want to have it such that everything is linked together. They call this volatile transaction trails. Either you don't have audit trails or you don't have any lasting relationship between the audit trails. We talked about this in terms of documents. So documents aren't linked together anymore. Can you see how that's going to be a problem if someone calls you and wants to know when something was shipped and you can't find the receiving report or the shipping documents that are associated with sending their purchase out to them? There is a tendency to say that the computer will check the work so we don't have to do that. It's good. The computer does check things. It can go across, and a lot of the work we were doing in the SUA packet, for example, multiplying across and adding down. Yes, the computer can do that, and it's wonderful. But you still have to think about other issues. For example, when you're recording a transaction and it's leases, is it an operating lease or is it a financing lease? Well, we handle it differently, don't we? In accounting, the computer needs to be kept up to date on the new rules as they relate to GAAP. And humans need to be involved in keeping track of that. And it needs to be programmed in so we know to check certain things, then it's operating, or other things, then it's financing. So decreased human involvement sometimes causes us to categorize all our transactions the same when they aren't, and we neglect GAAP. Another example is changes in the tax code. That has to be put in there somehow, doesn't it, if we have a comprehensive tax IT system? Along with that then is this uniform processing, as I was discussing. If the transaction is exactly the same, okay, but who's going to check on that? Who's going to make sure it is the same? And again, this is a part of the human involvement in it, and the need to keep up with changes and to do the programming. Unauthorized access. This is not just coming from outside the company, it's from inside. So we have user IDs and passwords. This has to do with the schemata we were talking about in the database. Everyone has a different schemata according to their jobs, what information they need, what they need to be able to see. How do you control what they see? You control what they see by using IDs, passwords, access to the information. And then the firewall is you've heard of fire doors, I guess, and maybe you've seen these. They're heavy metal doors that keep the fire from coming into a particular part of a building. Well, you have something like that to keep people out. Data vulnerability, you need to store copies of the data. How much data, how do you access the data is also another thing to consider. You have a temptation to reduce the number of employees that are required because the work can be done quickly and easily. Well, we do not want to violate our ARC, authorization, record keeping, and custody. We still need to keep that in mind. And then the other thing is if we have the computer checking the totals and checking our math, then why do we need to have people looking at it? Well, you still need people to approve things. You have to have an approval process within your accounting system. You can't get rid of it because approvals are sure checking to make sure things are right, but it is also the authority of an individual saying that it's okay to go ahead with an action. So you still need authorization. And then another threat which happens is malicious software that can get in there and do a number on your company. And one of the examples I have is from a company over in Missouri, not very far from us, Jasper County. They had a pop machine, I'll call it a pop machine, or a Coke machine, a Pepsi machine, whatever you want to call it. And actually that thing was using the intranet, which is similar to the internet of the company, and it was using that to file inventory levels in the machine. So they knew when to put more Cokes, Pepsi products, whatever, in the machine. So people would come in, they'd put their coins in, they'd scan their credit cards, whatever, and they'd take out the soft drink. And there was a need to replace the soft drinks as they were being used. So what did this very smart machine do? It used the company's um, software, including the access to the internet, to send out and to say, well, this inventory is low. We need to have it restocked. And then the person would come in, and I should mention that this was an outside company, okay? And they would come in, and then they would put more units, more cans of soft drink in there as whatever was needed. The problem was not only was it using the internet and the intranet of this company for that purpose, it was also going into the software of the company and stealing data from the company and sending it out as well. So the soda machine was a spy, in other words. And so that is a type of malicious software. And it comes from all kinds of sources. The more smart products we have, the more likely this is to happen. And this malware, then, the Trojan horse, you can have software that your company has, and the company has software, but there's something in a software, maybe the company purchases software. There's something in there that does something it shouldn't be doing. So it's hidden inside. Just like the Trojan horse, it was a big horse and there were people inside, and when the big horse looked like a gift and was brought inside the compound, then the men inside were the warriors that came out. So there's things like warriors that come out of software that you don't know are there. At a certain date, certain things can happen. This is called logic bombs. We were all worried what would happen when the calendar turned over to the year 2000. I realize you were probably not even born then. It's just awesome to think of that. But anyway, we were worried about it, and it was a part of this logic bomb thinking. A worm is something that goes from computer to computer, and the way this gets in there is you open up a file. You don't know someone who's sending you an email, but you want to know what they're sending you, so you open the email or you open the file. That's bad. Denial of service is when you have so much hitting your company that it can't process anymore. It overloads the computer. So what if you do this? If you overload someone's computer, they also can't process sales, right? Isn't that a problem? You know what phishing is? That's when we talk about usually talking about senior citizens who give out their social security numbers. Backdoor is when you go into a company by going around the protections that normally would exist, such as the passwords. And I liken this really to you've heard of people having scanners and they can go around and they can open garage doors, yeah, or scanners so that they can get into someone's internet access. They can unlock it. This is what we're talking about when we talk about backdoor. The next thing is COVID. And I realize it's kind of cutting us off over here, isn't it, on the left? I apologize for that. COBIT is a control and government framework which exists for IT, and it's interesting because we said COSO was the thing that existed for AIS. Well, you have COBIT for IT. The first principle says look at the stakeholder, see what the stakeholder needs, and try to take care of the stakeholder. The second principle, it says to cover enterprise end to end. The beginning of the semester we were talking about AIS and what AIS was. We had a lot of definitions for it. And I said, well, I rejected this because it isn't talking about it as a system. And that's what IT is. IT should be a system. That's what we're talking about. That's talking about it in 2. It's talking about it in principle 3. It's talking about it in principle 4. It implies you have a holistic approach. You're looking at everything. You are using one framework, one way of getting things done, and it goes from every aspect of your information system that you have. So when we talk about AIS, it is wrong, so wrong to think of AIS as a standalone thing. It is not. It is integrated into everything. It's integrated into logistics. It's integrated into human resources. It's, as we were discussing this throughout the semester when we were in a cycle, I was trying to show you how other things, other systems, we're interfacing with AIS. You can call it interfacing, you can call it integration. There is a cohesiveness, a holistic way of looking at your information system for your company that includes accounting. So you can't do that. You can't say this is accounting over there and then this is the IT people, for logistics, and this is the IT people for accounting. You can't do that. Everything is linked. So when you have principles or policies or ways of handling things, they go throughout your organization. And the organizational structure takes into account this, the culture, the ethics, behaviors, what's acceptable. There's a consistency with the information. And when we're talking about databases, I probably should have brought out to your attention that everyone who looks at the same sort of a attribute within the database, if it is actually the same data, they need to understand what it is. They have the same conceptual understanding of that thing. So if you were talking about sales, what is sales? What is the definition of sales? And in accounting, we know what that definition is. But the other people in the organization, they need to have the same definition because they're looking at the same data that's called sales. Now, there's a governance for IT that has to be separate from management. And this is the oversight. This is the oversight. We're talking about the oversight of IT. So this is COBIT, Control and Governance Framework, and it has to do with IT. Information security goals are confidentiality, availability, and integrity. Confidentiality. Only the people who need to see it see it. Availability. If we need it, we've got it. Integrity. There is a consistency that exists throughout. And we talked a lot about that when we were talking about databases. So the steps to approaching this sort of information security, we need to see where are the threats? Where are the threats coming from? We need to analyze these threats. What are our greatest threats? And of course, if you do a risk analysis, you're going to put your most money into the greatest risk. And risk means what's the potential loss, not only just the amount of the loss, but the likelihood of the loss. If this bad thing happens, what's going to happen to us? A good example of this is you wouldn't expect a company to have breaches into their customer database happening very much. But boy, if it happens, doesn't it hurt you? Because if it happens, you're going to announce that you've had that breach, and then who is going to want to take out your credit card, your proprietary credit card? No one. Who, if you're a target, who is going to want to take out that red card or whatever it's called? Who's going to want to do that? If you are visiting a store and you think that the store is using your phone to capture information, who's going to use the internet that's freely provided in the store? So you have to do this risk analysis, and you can say, well, this is what I'm hoping to get from it. This is what it's going to cost me. If something goes bad here, what's the downside? What's it going to cost me? What's the effect it's going to have on my company? And then you have to design controls to compensate for risks that need to exist. So if you're talking about an attack from outside, what kind of controls are you going to put in there? Because if your customer database is breached, that's going to be major, right? And then you have a plan for addressing everything. A plan for addressing it means if something goes wrong, you got a plan too. It's not just a plan for to prevent it. It's to do something if it goes bad. And then who can access and use the IT and all of that. So along with what we had earlier in the semester, we said that we have controls in place, and we're talking about the controls, and we were talking about locking up our assets, making sure that there's security associated with those assets. We were talking about doing checks to make sure that the employees didn't have a criminal background. And then if something went bad, and we call those detective controls, for example, we could do the bank reconciliation, and we could actually find what had happened after the fact, that there was a theft or whatever. We could determine what happened, and then we could go back and we could make adjustments. So controls in IT is the same sort of thing. You need to have some preventive controls, whether that might be password protection at a terminal. You need to have detective controls. You need to see who is accessing what terminals at what point or what data. And then you need to have the control ability to go in there and fix your problems, increase your preventive controls. The broad controls are general controls that are related to IT, including those to the software applications and changes in the access to the system. Specific application controls have to do with the specific application. These controls might be accessing things, processing them, the output that's provided. General controls suggest that IT should be a separate function of the company. As we previously mentioned, it needs to be separate from management. We have segregation of duties in IT. This is very important. Something you know from the previous PowerPoint is a developer of the software, the one who changes the software, shouldn't be the one that's running the data through, and we call that person an operator. So they're separate. Software controls and hardware controls are included in the software and the hardware itself. And this is particularly in limiting access to things. We're talking about physical controls then. Within general controls, you are going to limit the access, you're going to passwords. These are different things you could do, and multiple multiple things are probably happening within any given company. Um, Certain terminals for certain applications. If you're processing lease, you wouldn't be in the payroll area, would you? No, I don't think so. The system access log. This is very good. So anytime you're sitting at your terminal, you're doing your work, it knows who logged in, what was the password used, and it is going to talk about what records were accessed by you, how they were changed by you, when you logged on, when you logged off, all of that information. Encryption is used, and sometimes it's used more now so that individuals cannot get into communications between parties. Um, this callback thing is pretty good. I would say this happens quite a lot, and it's probably something you have actually experienced, because when you try to access your account now, some financial institutions, I want to say all because most of what I've seen, you will try to get into it, and it will not let you immediately into the system. It's going to ask for something else. And then what it might do is it might send a code to your cell phone. That's the same thing as a callback sort of a thing. So it sends you the code, then you need that code to get back in and to get into your system. Limit the physical access to documents. Oh, biometric technologies. This is interesting because they're using biometric technologies now for access to your plant, your job. And we used to use ID cards, and the ID cards were either inserted or and they had chips or some other device, magnetic strips that were read, or we had them on our badge, and you would come to the door and it would scan that, and that's the way it would also keep track, by the way, of the hours you worked. So now we've moved up, and now we're using fingerprints, and we're using retina scans. And these have to be accurate, very accurate indeed, and a little bit higher security because your badge or your card could be given to someone and they could be entering. I suppose if you checked your videotape of what had happened, you could see who was coming and going and if they were indeed the person. But using a fingerprint or a retina scan is very specific, and you can't get around this by handing off your retina to someone else, right? Automatic log off or inactivity, I have that. It happens quite a lot, and all at once in the middle of something it's gone and I have to relog back on again. And security personnel also involved there. You need some general controls that help you with the environment because you need to make sure that the cooling and heating systems are there, and internal and external firewalls and other access controls. Application controls have to do with only an application to make sure that the authorized information goes in and it gets processed the way it should be processed. And on the next slide, we'll talk about particular application controls. Input controls provide assurance that those things that are going in and the data that is processed is authorized, complete, and accurate. And you could have edit checks to make sure all the numbers, say in an account number or a customer's number, is right. There's a reasonable check, and this is to say, is a check written for $1 million, for example, reasonable? Is a check written for $1 reasonable? Things like that. Maybe you're going to do something like this, particularly with your payroll. Payroll check for $1 million reasonable? Validity checks, the checking account number, the account number for the vendor that you're ordering from, the account number for your customer. Whenever we do a journal entry to accounts receivable or accounts payable, and we have a subsidiary account number, are we making sure that's valid when we're doing that? The check digit verification that got cut off here is sometimes the numbers that you're using are only numbers that you can add the first 5 together, divide by the next number, and come up with the next number. That's a digit verification. So if you can't go through those steps with the numbers you've entered, then you have a problem. The last one is also cut off. It's a zero balance, and we know this one very well. Debits and credits are equal, right? Batch processing is when you use when you do things in batches, management approval before it's done. How many records are going in? And I liken this to pieces of paper as in documents, and counting the number that are going in and the total value that you're going to be inputting. It might be the total of sales. And they also have another thing called a hash total, which is not the total of sales, but maybe something like a customer's particular number that gets added up. Does that add up to the total? So a problem again with batch processing is you're going to have a piece of paper, and on this piece of paper you're going to write down what you believe is the number of records. You're going to write down the total number of sales that are on each one of those pieces of papers added together, right? The total for all that batch. And then you're also going to have a hash total. So you got to come up with these numbers, and then you put that into the system, and then you give each one of these particular pieces of paper, put all the data from those pieces of paper in the system. So what if you did your totals? What if you did what's up here, this one wrong, and this one wrong on that first piece of paper? Well, it would say that no, something's missing. We don't come up with that same total when the computer processed it. It didn't come up with those going through. So it was just you added things up wrong. So again, this highlights the problem with batch processing. One of the problems with batch processing. Processing controls provide reasonable assurance that the data submitted are processed, that are approved. There are input controls, the validation, completeness, everything's there. They check for arithmetic, and that includes the debits equaling the credits. Sequential checks, run to run. What is run to run? I think this is like a walk forward. You think about what you have in the system before you do a run of data, and then you say, well, if I put this data in there, what will the updated total be? And is that indeed the updated total? If it is, then you have accomplished your thing in hand. Key integrity. This is data integrity that is related to the key. And the reason why it's important here is because you're searching on that key. If the key is bad, then you can't get to all of those that are associated with it. If you have a hierarchical database, you can't go from this point and look at the individual, say, purchase orders that are associated with that customer or that vendor. Output controls, the next topic. Reasonable assurance that the results are accurate and only viewed by the authorized persons. You keep a log of everything that happens. This is important then. Who went in there and who did it? When was this processed? When was it changed? And then if something happens, you're going to do checks to make sure things are fine. What if your run-to-run doesn't work? Then you need to have a listing of it. And a run-to-run control is an output control, but it also has an error listing. And then also the record counts. What did you expect to be processed and what was processed? Do they agree? Specific controls. IT security says Only access needs to be granted to the authorized person. So you want to make sure that there's some system, whatever is in place and whatever is proper. Again, we said there's a lot of different controls could be in place for your organization to make sure that only the right people are looking at the right things. This is access to it. So when they access it, they could control, they could change it, or it could be just viewing and downloading, and that's a problem too. Systems development and maintenance, we're talking about changes. When you make changes, you cannot make changes to what is being processed today. You put it in the sandbox, right? We put it in the sandbox, and when we put it in the sandbox, we are going to have the programmers do it, and there is supervision of what is happening in the sandbox. There is no live access to data, and this is what we are processing today, today's business. You don't want to have the programmers going in there and playing around with today's business. You instead are going to create something that's a simulation of what you have today or another day or some file from the past, make a copy of something actually existed, and then have them work with that in the sandbox. You're not going to do work on live data, which is today's data being processed. Console operators, we sometimes call these just operators. They schedule all the jobs. So you have limited IT abilities and you have a lot of files that need to be processed. Who controls that? Well, these are the people that are doing the day-to-day work, and they are going to schedule the jobs. And frequently what happens is the big jobs that take a lot of time and need to be take a lot of processing time and also take a lot of I don't know if I should say computer power or computer use, might be done at night. And you might do them also in batches at night. And then the things that need to be done and updated immediately might do real time, and they might schedule those jobs for during the day when everyone is at work. So the consoles operators are responsible for prioritizing what gets done and running it at the proper times. Okay, I'll skip the librarian for a moment. Let's go to data administration. There's two things here. There's a data administrator, and this is the physical storage and all of that. So this is thinking about physicality of data, whereas the database analyst, database management here, database administrator is doing the physical, and the database management or manager is responsible for thinking like the user. So the database manager or database management is responsible for the user view and the software and hardware that accomplish what that particular user wants to accomplish. So an administrator is looking at the data and thinking about the physicality of the data and the storage of it and all of that, whereas the database manager is responsible for thinking about a particular user's need. Who are the end users? The end users are the people that use this data. They do not own any data other than the data which they need for their particular jobs. So the end user is a particular individual who needs it for their job. They don't own the database. They aren't considering the database. Only thing they say is their schema. The jobs in IT. These are the segregation of duties, the things to keep separate. So perhaps I should have had this bit here underlined, so you'd understand that the things that are listed are the actual jobs to be kept separate. A systems analyst is the one that designs or works on the design. They consider how that application is going to be designed. A programmer is going to put things in the sandbox and work with them and to fine-tune how things work. Operators, and we often call these console operators, are doing the day-to-day scheduling of the work. The file librarians keep track of everything just as a librarian would. They're going to keep documentation that associated with what, say, goes into that database or everything about the files. And then you also have a security officer, and that's in control group. What does a security officer do? A security officer is going to keep track of who is accessing what data from what console at what point in time. We said we needed a log of this. We don't just need a log, we need someone that's accessing it and saying, wait a minute, should this person be at work? This person has been on their computer for 20 hours straight. Is there a problem? This person is trying to access data that's not it's outside their job. Is that a problem? So the IT or information security officer is the one that's going to be looking at this. Now, although I said these names here, one name, you have to understand there's multiple people. So when I say the security officer, there's multiple security officers, and if you have different, I would think of this actually as when you, my analysis might be if you're at the airport and there's air traffic control, right? Air traffic control, and there's a number of air traffic controllers in one room. You might have a number of information security officers, and instead of looking at airplanes, they're looking at access and they're looking at terminals and terminal activities. There will be a log that's done and there'll be a review of that, and you can actually program into it that log analysis to determine if something strange is happening. Only the database administrator updates the data dictionary, by the way. So what we should get out of this then, that there's a computer operator or the console operator, they're the ones that are running the jobs. And they're doing the scheduling and they're sending things through. Those people that do the operation shouldn't be programming. You've all heard the story about people that have had an extra penny taken out of their paycheck in a big corporation and it going into someone else's paycheck as a direct pay is in a direct deposit. So they're doing an extra direct deposit sort of from your pay into someone else's account. And if they took a penny out of everyone's account and you had 100,000 people working for your company, you can see how that adds up to some money. And if they kept doing this every 2 weeks, every paycheck, it would add up to a lot. Well, how did they do that? Well, they did it because they had some knowledge or ability to change the program. They did it because they had some ability to also use that program and run the program and schedule the running of the program because there was no oversight of that. So that's there's a big fraud problem if you have the day-to-day operations and programming combined. You can program things in there and then run them when they won't be detected. Or another problem here, I suppose, is to think about the police. You don't want the police, the IT security officers, to be doing programming either, because you're really looking at them as being the ones that are policing what's happening. So system programmers should not be involved in processing or production of data. Application programmers should also not be doing anything with data or operation. If you're a user of data, you can change the data. You're putting things in there, but you're not changing the program. If you need a program change, you're going to request a program change, and the programmer is going to do the change. So you are not going to do your own changes. And then the help desk is very helpful because they are going to see what's going on and they're going to say, we have a problem developing here. We've had about 10 calls about this thing, and they can see what's happening ahead of it becoming a great catastrophe. So keep that help desk person separate from others, and these are all individuals. It's a segregation of duties which exists in IT, and it needs to exist in